Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you may be joining us. My name is Lina Digolo. I'm a Senior Associate with the Prevention Collaborative. I'd like to welcome everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to have an interesting session. This webinar in this webinar, the speakers will discuss quite an important issue that's quite close to our hearts, the practice-based knowledge, and we will look at understanding the needs and wishes during this webinar, we will look at understanding the value of PBK, which is the practice-based knowledge, and the different ways in which it affects the field of violence prevention. So just before we get into this, I will be showing a video that sets out why we believe that practice-based learning and everyday experiences in designing and implementing programs form an important body of practice-based knowledge and has significant potential to improve our programming. Before we get to that, I want to show an overview of how the session will run. We will have the video that will play shortly, and we'll have our speakers coming in. First, I'll introduce Devin, Faris, who is a gender-responsive evaluation and learning specialist who helps groups to utilize PBK to inform effective violence prevention interventions. He has a vast experience in leading organization capacity strengthening, program design, and research in a variety of sectors in Africa and Asia. Devin will share with us why it's important, why PBK is important, and how we can surface and apply it in our different programs. He will then hand over things to Wangechi Wachira, who is an executive director in the Center of Rights, Education and Awareness, better known as CREAW, which is a local organization in Kenya, women's rights organization. Wangechi is a leading women's activist and has for several years championed the application of human rights within women empowerment programs globally, both in Kenya and globally. She'll share some reflections from CREAW and how they have used practice-based knowledge to improve their program. She'll also share some challenges that are faced by local organizations in this area. Then finally, Lyndsay will come in. Lyndsay is our knowledge manager at the Prevention Collaborative with over 20 years professional experience in research, program development, evaluation, technical assistance, and capacity building in international development. She has led the Prevention Collaborative team in designing and implementing our PBK program, and she will take time to talk about the opportunities and challenges in elevating PBK. And she'll also share some experiences on a workshop that we conducted during the SVRI forum that generated a lot of conversations around this issue. So just before I turn to the presenters, we will show you a short video that I mentioned before that we developed around practice-based knowledge.
I am Pendo. I work in Mashimoni community to prevent violence against women and children. Most days, I visit 20 couples at their homes, conduct group sessions, and meet my team. My experiences as a practitioner give a lot of lessons on what works and what doesn't to prevent violence. Often, I record these lessons as notes in my book, as observations through WhatsApp messages to colleagues, or leave them in my memory. But this information is not considered equal to the findings from the research studies requested by the donor. In the violence prevention field, the success of interventions is often judged by measuring a limited number of outcomes as defined by researchers and donors. But not enough attention is paid to how the groups and communities experience the programs and its impacts. The stories, experiences, and ideas from women and men in the community or my colleagues help in the program's success. These help me resolve conflict, earn the community's trust, and gradually challenge harmful behaviors and norms. I once had a group of couples from Lyndsay village who attended their sessions inconsistently. When I held an informal discussion to learn what was going on, the couple said that the sessions coincided with market days. This information helped me adjust the session's timing, and we had more couples completing their sessions. After having that experience countless times, I knew that I had to start advocating for capturing and applying practice-based knowledge. Here are a few things we should be mindful of. Practitioners should get opportunities to share their lessons learned about violence and its prevention. Funding for documentation and analysis of practice-based knowledge is essential to capture intended and unintended program consequences. We need to embrace diverse ways of understanding violence to tell a more inclusive story of prevention. Ultimately, this will help us develop more effective approaches to reduce violence and improve the well-being of those we work with. Let's tell an inclusive story of violence prevention.
Now I'd like to turn over things to Devin. Devin will share a bit on why PBK is important and why we need to surface and apply it. Welcome, Devin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lena. Thanks to everybody for joining us today to continue to grow our practice-based knowledge community. So I just want to talk for a few minutes today about why we think practice-based knowledge is really important and share with you some of the ideas about how we can surface and apply that practice-based knowledge to our prevention programming. Just to give you a little bit of a context to show you our journey around this idea, when the Prevention Collaborative was first being set up a couple of years ago, there were a lot of consultations with practitioners, activists, organizations, and donors working on violence prevention. And one of the key areas identified as a challenge by many of these that we spoke to were these hierarchies of knowledge and evidence that have come to characterize the prevention field. So while we of course recognize the value of rigorous evaluations and academic and quantitative research in the field, which many members of the collaborative contributed to over the years, we also recognize that these sources of knowledge are largely valued above forms of knowledge that are a bit more qualitative, practice-based, and locally produced in nature. So this is sort of limiting our understanding of the complex social change processes and practitioner experiences that we need to understand. So we decided to undertake some initial work around what we've termed practice-based knowledge. So far, we've developed a position paper about the importance of PBK, which I co-authored with Prashanti Jayasakara, with fantastic inputs from a practice-based knowledge working group formed within the collaborative. We have a practice brief on some of the practical approaches to documenting and applying PBK written by Selena Palm and Allison Klaus, as well as a pre-conference workshop at SVRI this year in Cape Town, which Lyndsay will be talking to you more about. So our aim here is really to support dialogue about this in the field and to work with partners to support the collection, application, and elevation of practice-based knowledge. Next slide. So you already saw the video, and at least we're able to read the information about what practice-based knowledge is. But what this looks like in practice includes practical knowledge and skills gained through hands-on action. So for example, facilitating community activities, running a training session, responding to backlash to interventions or approaches, or doing organization work with a social movement. It includes stories and experiences shared with practitioners by program participants and other stakeholders, as well as the stories and experiences of practitioners themselves, which often go untold. Includes direct observations of program activities being implemented, analysis of monitoring data collected to track progress of activities and outcomes, and this is largely done through traditional M&E frameworks that you all might be familiar with. And also formal and informal individual and group reflections on things like organizational culture, best practices, power dynamics, and how these facilitate or constrain programming. So it's a really wide and diverse body of knowledge that we're referring to here. Next slide. So why is practice-based knowledge important? Well, through the elevation of practice-based knowledge, we're really trying to move beyond a knowledge system that's based in knowledge extraction, right? So we're trying to move beyond this narrative that only outside academics and researchers produced rigorous knowledge and evidence. If we can think of knowledge as a type of power, practice-based knowledge keeps the power in the hands of the people that are creating their own knowledge every single day. So we believe that elevating the diverse voices and experiences of practitioners across different contexts is really essential to improve understanding of violence and of prevention work. So this should include opportunities for practitioners who are often members of the communities they're working in to share their own ideas and insights about violence and its prevention, and some of the more rarely discussed personal impacts of prevention work, like emotional hardship, vicarious trauma, or secondary trauma. PBK can also help us better understand program dynamics and processes. You know, often we go into organizational websites or reading through reports, and all that we really have, if we're lucky, is brief descriptions of programs, right? Maybe some pieces of curricula, some modules we can look at. Maybe we'll see some evaluation results. What we don't see and what we don't hear is explanations of how a program's implemented, more of the nuts and bolts, the ins and outs of diverse types of prevention programming. So this includes how program components interact with local dynamics to produce change, looking at intended and unintended consequences of programming, and how we might think about sustaining, replicating, and scaling promising approaches. So for example, practice-based knowledge can help us to understand why an adaptation of a program that may have worked in one context then fails to work so well in another. Same program, but in a different context, it just doesn't stick. So traditional forms of research may not be able to uncover these kinds of things. So ultimately, practice-based knowledge can help us tell a more inclusive story about prevention. Next slide. So we're trying to think about why practice-based knowledge is not currently prioritized and why there's a need for this work. In the Global South in particular, most violence prevention programs and approaches have tended to be funded by international development agencies and donors, largely from the Global North, who generally decide which interventions are to be implemented and which results are to be documented and reported. Right, so local organizations aren't really encouraged to use different approaches to document their outcomes and learnings. And just a quick note on language here. When we say Global South and Global North, we're using these terms to call attention to existing power imbalances that our practice-based knowledge agenda is trying to address, but not to reinforce any division between these perceived categories. So we also see that evidence has a tendency to be pretty narrowly defined as data and analysis that's generated through methods that the scientific community thinks of as rigorous scientific design. Things like randomized control trials, quasi-experimental studies, cross-sectional or cohort studies. So of course, these forms of evidence are essential for the development of the field and should absolutely continue. This has resulted in a narrowing of the types of research and programs that receive funding, and it's narrowed what is deemed worthy of investigation and of learning about to begin with. So these studies also kind of narrow the outcomes that we're learning about. They focus mostly on impact, often at the expense of understanding more about why and how interventions interact with local dynamics to contribute to complex change. So as a result, through all this, the voices and perspectives of so-called experts have tended to dominate those of practitioners and activists working locally around the world, as well as those of the people that these programs are engaging. And through this, there's been little funding available to support local actors to document and synthesize other forms of knowledge and learning, especially those that are practice-based, narrative in structure, and more indigenous or locally produced. So we also recognize that organizations and social movements in both the Global South and the Global North are very, very busy tackling incredibly challenging issues and may not have had the time or the capacities or the bandwidth to share their know-how and develop systems and processes to be documenting and applying practice-based knowledge. Next slide. So when we're thinking about developing a practice-based knowledge culture, we're drawing from a wide body of learning approaches that many practitioners and activists are already doing in their work. So we want to highlight in this space and in others throughout our PBK agenda, different ways that we can collect and document, analyze and synthesize, and finally share and apply our learnings from practice to improve programs and strengthen women's movements. So these processes might be done by practitioners themselves, they might be done by researchers. Either way, we're now beginning to uncover more principles and approaches that can help groups to better learn from and share learning about their work. Next slide. So collecting and documenting practice-based knowledge, it shouldn't just be another technical exercise or a new set of boxes to tick. It should really embrace everyone's ongoing processes of learning and knowing. So rule number one to this is document, document, document. We want all practitioners to be keeping records of their process and learnings, both what they expected to see in their programs and what may not have been what may have been unexpected. To do this, we know that organizations need to create safe spaces that are free of fear and judgment so that we can all safely explore failure and shortcomings in programming together and pay close attention to organizational power dynamics to ensure that all voices are equally valued. We also need to be clear about what we want to know and why, so not just collecting information about everything we do day to day, but really regularly identifying and revisiting key learning questions to help move our learning forward. We also want to be creative about how we're documenting knowledge, or some voices tend to get excluded. So documenting knowledge doesn't mean writing a giant report, right? So for example, not everyone's going to excel at formal M&E methods. Not everyone is comfortable speaking in large groups. Many practitioners or participants might be illiterate or not speak the dominant language used in more formal documentation methods. We have to remember that everyone has their own unique way of learning, and there should be space to discuss what ways of learning and documentation make the most sense for everyone. So informal, ongoing chats with practitioners and program participants can be really useful, and those can be documented and shared with other members of your organization. Some really unique methods that are starting to be used are things like WhatsApp groups or Viber or Line or WeChat or whatever, depending on the context that you're in. With these kind of groups, you can send updates from your community work, you can send quick voice messages, send photos with consent from those in the photos, of course, and create an opportunity and a space to discuss the work with those that you're working with. In your organizations, you can also think about building staff capacity to use simple approaches like these, or like journaling, writing down notes in a notebook, storytelling, video or filmmaking, or other participatory methods to frame conversations or interviews with practitioners. So we can also consider alternatives to traditional M&E frameworks. One example is through outcome harvesting, which entails looking at an outcome that you've observed in your programs, often in the form of a change in a range of specific behaviors, and then involving those who influence that change, like practitioners or facilitators, to work backwards to identify which factors contributed to it. And of course, other more traditional M&E approaches like observations and most significant change stories can be really useful as well. Next slide. So whether or not practitioners themselves are directly involved in all the collection and documentation of information, there may be researchers involved as well. practitioners should always be directly involved in analyzing and making sense of information and experiences that have been collected or documented. So there should be structured reflection time or pause points that take place throughout the learning cycle. Staff workshops can work really nicely for this to provide a space for open discussion where everyone can feed in their interpretations, always with an eye towards cycling learning back into the programs themselves. We also want to maintain the richness or the thickness of data that comes out of practice-based knowledge. We don't want to water down complex information just to fit into donor reports or tick boxes. But if we're working with more rich qualitative information, we want to retain that richness, including direct quotes, engaging emotions, and then of course packaging this rich information into sort of bite-sized chunks, kind of ways that we can share this information with other practitioners so they can digest and apply to their context as well. So we can see some examples of ways that groups are analyzing and synthesizing practice-based knowledge in our practice brief, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go to the next slide. So ultimately, practice-based knowledge should be shared and applied within and across organizations, and at the right time and in the right way with funders and donors as well. So internally, this can take place through regular or quarterly learning meetings that bring together practitioners and managers in a safe space to unpack learnings together and to create action plans to feed those learnings into programming. So, this should always be focused on how to feed learning directly into programs, thinking about what's working well, what needs to be adjusted, like changing facilitators, including new participants, et cetera, or what is ineffective and should be stopped altogether. Practice-based knowledge can be shared externally to other organizations as well, and this is really, really an important component. There should be a focus on broader learnings and tips for other practitioners. So rather than learning all of these things in isolation from one another, we should all be connecting and creating spaces to be able to share what we're learning. So this can be done through short synthesized program briefs, like webinars like this one that we're having right now, through social media engagements. And practice-based knowledge should also be shared back with program participants. It's always best if we can be creative in the ways that we're sharing our knowledge through storytelling, dramas, visuals, to make it more accessible to other groups and to continue involving program participants in the learning journey. So ultimately, a take-home message here is that practitioners and organizational leaders should be involved at all stages of the learning process. And leaders of organizations really need to embrace the importance of practice-based learning approaches. We know M&E systems are one way to do this, but key learning questions and program evaluations should always be driven by the needs of practitioners and program participants themselves, and should always work with the learning styles of those on the front lines of the work. So ultimately, we really want to start with where people are learning, build off of that, and close the learning loop by applying PBK to stronger programming. So now I'll hand it back over to Lena and the other panelists to move the conversation forward. Thank you.
Lyndsay, just while we're trying to get Wangechi's sound connected, I just thought I would give a brief introduction to Wangechi. I'm working with CREAW Kenya in one of the collaborative's learning partnerships. So Wangechi is the executive director and runs CREAW, which is about 20 years old, and has been working for quite a long time on a range of women's rights issues, including women's empowerment, women's political participation, and gender-based violence. They've got a strong record of working on gender-based violence response, access to services and legal support for survivors, and in the last few years have been transitioning to also include work on prevention. So I'm hoping that Wangechi will be able to come online now and talk about their experiences. Okay, good afternoon, morning, evening, everybody. So I'm Lyndsay McLean, and I'm the Knowledge Manager for the Prevention Collaborative. And with the team of people in the collaborative and beyond, we've been trying to launch this agenda on practice-based knowledge. So I'm just going to say a little bit more about some of the challenges and opportunities we currently see to elevate practice-based knowledge. And this builds both off our own analysis and review and consultations, as well as some of the inputs from participants at the workshop we ran in Cape Town at SVRI last month. So firstly, just to talk about some of the challenges, building off some of what Devin said earlier, I think one of the challenges we face is sort of fundamental disagreements really in the field and beyond about what knowledge and evidence are. And related to that, whose knowledge counts, and also what we mean by rigor. I myself am a qualitative researcher and often get quite frustrated about being told that qualitative research is not rigorous compared to quantitative research. And I think all of us here on this call probably realize that different types of research, different types of knowledge, even including stories and videos and observations, they all count as different types of knowledge and contribute to us building a picture of what we know. But I think there's a job to be done about really communicating what knowledge is and what different forms of evidence are and what they can contribute. I think there are also some problems around the ownership of knowledge, and these were discussed at the SVR in Cape Town, around some of the challenges sometimes where researchers might come in and research a program, do a randomized control trial, but it feels like a fairly extractive process in which the organizations and practitioners that are really doing the work on the ground, and sometimes even the beneficiaries, don't really own that knowledge. It's kind of researchers come in and sort of take it away and publish it in peer-reviewed journals. So this is something that we also need to address. And then what we really need to do collectively is start to really collate some concrete examples of how practitioner knowledge has made programming more effective. So those stories are out there. I think there are some that are documented, but there's a limited amount of documentation. So where have stories from practitioners, insights, the decisions and changes that practitioners make on the ground in communities, how have they really affected how programs run and the results of programs? And so related to all of this is really sort of showing how practice-based knowledge can be credible. So it's not dismissed as being anecdotal. Even one story can count. We have to be clear about how that story counts and what insight that gives. But also sometimes when you collate a whole range of stories that are saying something similar, that becomes really important as evidence and messages to put forward in the community. Another challenge that was identified and discussed, particularly SVRI, was the competition between organizations. So in reality, we're in a field with scarce amounts of funding, and organizations from the same context, the same region, sometimes globally, have to compete for funding. And this can sometimes limit the willingness of organizations to share knowledge and share learning. So this is something we also have to address. And then, as Devin mentioned earlier, there is an issue of capacity and the time and budget of organizations to document practice. So I think often it's not that organizations don't want to do this. I think many organizations recognize the importance, but often they're running scarce budgets, limited timeframes for programs, and they are sort of running around trying to implement interventions and collect the kind of information that donors want. And this leaves limited time and budget to document and take time to document this sort of practitioner learning and practitioner knowledge. And related to that is therefore the risk of overburdening practitioners and activists who are already pretty busy with their work. And finally, a challenge that we've identified is, where are the platforms, where are the outlets to publish practice-based knowledge? There are obviously peer-reviewed journals for academic research and other platforms, but where is it that we can publish and disseminate practice-based knowledge? At the moment, there aren't many platforms in which to do this. So on the more positive side, we also, have identified some opportunities at the moment in the field of violence prevention to elevate practice-based knowledge. So I think many of us, and this was discussed again in Cape Town SVRI, realize that about the way that programs are implemented. This sounds obvious, but the way that programs are implemented is critical to how effective those programs are. As I say, it sounds like an obvious point, but we now have several cases, for example, of randomized control trials of the same intervention, and in one context they appear to work, in another they don't. So how much of that is about contextual factors, and how much of that is about actually how the program was implemented? How many community facilitators were there? How well were they trained? Were they able to follow the manuals? What decisions did practitioners take? So I think there's a growing realization in the field that these kind of nuts and bolts decisions made on the ground by practitioners can make the difference between the same model or approach being effective in one context from another. And related to that, I think there is an increasing interest, including from donors and funders, in learning from failure, in realizing we sometimes have to take risks and sometimes things fail, and how do we learn from failures as well as successes? And how do we look particularly at unintended consequences of programs, which may be positive or may be negative? I think related to this, there's a lot of talk at the moment more broadly in the development community about adaptive programming. Several donors have been funding this kind of programming for a few years. I think it's still in its inception, in that I'm not sure much adaptive programming is very adaptive, but the idea is there that we need to learn on an ongoing basis from practice and then adapt programs to what we're seeing on the ground in terms of the emerging results. I do think that we have some emerging promising and good practices, especially from women's rights organisations, around collating and applying practitioner insights. It's not that no one's doing anything. We have some examples, and it's now about how we bring those together and we start to get those out and disseminate those. And equally, I think we have some examples of improved researcher-practitioner collaborations where researchers really do work well with practitioners, that the knowledges of each are valued and they are put into various publications and briefs. So I think there are some changes in the field that create an opportunity here. So just finally, what I would like to do is the last couple of slides here before hopefully we hand back to Wangechi, is talk about some of the initial ideas that we've had and were also generated in consultations and through that workshop in Cape Town around things that might be done to elevate and document practice-based knowledge. So just to say that in terms of the prevention collaborative, I mean, our mission really is to serve the violence prevention field. So we are really here to think, what can we do in terms of facilitate? So yeah, so just to say, yeah, the collaborative is very interested in what we can do to facilitate this agenda. We've got a small startup budget for this. So what can we do, and what can we do in partnership with others? So one thing is to provide a platform to elevate practice-based knowledge and diversify voices. We've started to try to do this through our knowledge platform that I'll just show you very briefly in a moment for those who've not seen that. But what else could we do? There is also a question, could we do something else? Could there be a practice-based knowledge journal? There are various kind of ideas here. And as I'm talking to all of you, it'd be great, if you could take some notes and share some of your own ideas or comment on these ideas when we get to the discussion. Another thing that we're already trying to do, but we could do a lot more of, is providing briefs about with practitioner stories, experiences, and demonstrating why these are useful for good programming. So actually putting some briefs out there through the website and in print as well, and through social media. Another idea that's been suggested, which we're not doing at present, but have been thinking about doing, is how do we facilitate a kind of community of practice and space for practitioners to share? And what does that look like? Is that online? Is that offline? Could that link, for example, to regular events at a regional level, maybe a conference about practice-based knowledge in the violence prevention field, which allows practitioners to share and for us to start to collate some of these experiences? And another suggestion that we've had, which there are different views on, is should we be trying to set up some kind of quality assurance or peer review process for practice-based knowledge? And if we were to do that collectively in the field, what might that look like? And how do we avoid that kind of creating new gatekeepers about, well, whose knowledge counts? So how do we do that in a way that assures quality but doesn't silence some types of knowledge and some voices? And then in terms of documenting practice-based knowledge, a couple of ideas that have come up is firstly, the idea of providing prevention scribes or writers that might support organisations that feel like they're too busy to document their own knowledge, who may come in and work and sit down with those organisations, listen and document knowledge with those organizations, whether that's in the form of stories or videos or photos, obviously in ways that are owned by them. And the idea would be not to sort of send in people from across the world, but to see and look for writers already in particular contexts, in particular countries, that could work with organizations in their own country. Secondly, where activists and practitioners do want to write and do want to take time to document their own stories, but might feel like they want some mentoring on that, is that something that the collaborative could provide in partnership with others? And then sort of more direct support to organisations to collect and apply practice-based knowledge, so more at a strategic level, how they might set up systems to do this. Another idea that's come up is about how could we kind of put out there some form of guidelines for ethical and equitable engagement between practitioners and researchers, and how to collaborate and work together in an ethical manner. And linked to that, could there be more briefs co-published with researchers and practitioners? This is something that the DFID What Works programme has done some of, is putting out briefs which are co-authored and co-produced by researchers and practitioners. Finally, more practice briefs. We've got some on our website, but with learnings and tips for practitioners. To put more of those out, and then to really think through some more creative means to capture and communicate practice-based knowledge that's not just briefs, but what about videos, photos, blogs and vlogs and podcasts and webinars like this one. So I think I'm going to actually hand back to Wangechi now, but I'm just going to put this page. I'm not going to show you the knowledge platform now just because of interest of time, because we've had a few delays. But that link there, you can go onto our knowledge platform and you can see some of the, under where it says practice-based resources, you can see some of the kind of resources we've started to try to create, including practice briefs and including also some different prevention stories and blogs that are already on our website. And if you're interested and haven't already signed up, the address on this slide or the link at the top of the web page is somewhere where you can sign up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you, Lyndsay. My name is Wangechi Wachira, and I work as Executive Director of CREAW. CREAW stands for Center for Rights Education and Awareness. And I'll share with you our journey, and I'm very, very delighted to be here this morning, this afternoon, and this evening to share with you our work. Next slide. So CREAW started, our work has been more on response, providing legal service, psychosocial support, and advocacy work around violence against women. But about in 2014, we began our work on prevention, and how we did our prevention is in partnership with Raising Voices, based in Uganda. And so what we did is to adapt the SASA model. I think this is a model that has been shared and is known by a lot of practitioners in the world, and with a focus to intimate partner violence. This work has been done 4 years in Nairobi, in one of the biggest slums in Nairobi, very, very urban, highly densely populated. And what we have done is in our implementation strategy has been very, very universal, mobilizing communities, working with community champions to be able to address issues of intimate partner violence. And as a result of this, then we have started our work in learning and evidencing our work, because quite often the question is, as we are doing all this work, what's the evidence, what is our learning, and where can we be able to share this platform? So the next slide, please. So what we have done and what we have seen as an organization is that as we do our evaluation, that there is a lot of bias on evaluation in the randomized control trials, meaning that we all understand that one, that they require a lot of resources for organizations or women's rights organizations of our size. Sometimes organizations like ourselves don't have the kind of capacity, or a lot of women's rights organizations don't have capacity in terms of staff, in terms of resources. And even when their resources is that we have to sub-hire someone to come and do this work and give a report, and finally then they're able to share with the organization. We have also experienced that a lot of these evaluations in the randomized controlled trials is that they are also driven by development partners, and sometimes they are not looking at the context. But on the other flip side, we also understand that women's rights organizations, they have a way of their internal practice for evidencing the work. And most of this is because working at the community level, you're able to see what are the success stories that are coming. And some of them are very, very powerful. What are the lessons learned in implementation of the programs? We have also seen that there are short videos that are done around the success of our work, but also the best practices that are coming from the communities. And whereas we understand that all these exist, is that we know that they have not gained the kind of traction that is required compared to reading an evaluation report for a program, because that evaluation will take some time to be done compared to a success story, which could be 1 or 2 or 3 stories, compared to an evaluation which would be more detailed or having a randomized controlled trials. So we have seen that all these stories, the lessons learned, the short videos, the best practices are happening, and the women's rights organization are able to be accountable to the work that they're doing, and they have ways that are internally embedded within the organization to do this work. Next slide, please. What can we be able to do differently as women's rights organization, but also working with other institutions? I think for me, in a lot of reflection for the organization, I think we have an opportunities for, or we have opportunities for partnership with researchers and practitioners to be able to come and see what is the work that the organizations that have been doing, how have they been able to document the work they have been doing, have they been able to do the stories, have they been able to document the best practices, how have they been able to do the short videos. Sometimes they are 2 minutes, sometimes they are 5 minutes, sometimes they are 10 minutes. So I see a very big opportunity for partnerships between the practitioners and researchers. I think the other thing that I would want to see is that some of these practices that are within the women's rights organizations, they are never funded. So the organizations, again, it provides a big opportunity to ensure that we have budgets that are included so that the practice-based knowledge is embedded within the organization. I think for me, I would also want to see that we encourage a culture of wider learning within the organizations and have a shift from the traditional monitoring and evaluation. And maybe this then also a very, very good opportunity for monitoring, evaluation, learning, and unlearning sometimes. So I see a very, very big opportunity to be able to shift from the traditional monitoring and evaluation. I think I also see, as I finish this slide, what we can be able to do differently is that we need to value the practice-based knowledge within the organization, because this has not been valued, has not been given the kind of traction that it does require. The other thing is that this knowledge is not only with one person within the organization. We have project officers, we have community activists, you have women that we work with. So I think it would be very, very important to be able to involve them in our data collection, our analysis, and also ensure that we are naming or we are acknowledging the work that they are contributing to the whole evidencing, and also providing the kind of information that we are looking for. Next slide, I think we will be looking, what is it that we can be able to get, and what is it that we are asking for women's rights organizations like the size of CREAW. One of the things that I see, I think there will be need for capacity building for women's rights organizations to be able to document, to be able to bring out the lessons that are coming from the work that we are doing. But also, once these lessons have been documented, they have been put together, how do we then package them? Because I think we have a challenge there, that we may have all this information with different people within the organization. I think it would be very, very good to be able to support the organization in the journey of packaging the information and ensuring that there are also platforms where we can be able to share this information. I think my number 2 is one to be able to development partner to recognize the need of practice-based knowledge and allow the budget line. I think when we look at the budgets for a lot of women's rights organizations, a lot of emphasis put on the implementation, and very, very little budgets are allocated in documenting and ensuring that the information that is being documented is being shared, and not only being shared at a local level, also being shared in national level and also international platforms. I would also want to see a mentorship for activists and practitioners to be able to write their stories. I think this will be very, very powerful, meaning that within an organization, the stories are not only coming from one person or a few within the organization. I think it would be very, very important to have a mentorship whereby you have more people being able to write their stories, to write the best they're able to do, and include that as work that has been going on, and be able to get spaces where they can be able to share. My final one as a task is to set up a support group whereby that there are spaces where activist practitioners are able to meet as and when, or it can be structured so that it's a regular basis, so that the community of practitioners from different organizations, different parts of the organization are able to meet and share what are the lessons that are coming. Where can we be able to? Where are we making changes? What are some of the approaches? What are some of the models that are working out there, and how can they be shared in an organization, be able to uptake or be able to adapt within their organization? Next slide, please. Allow me now to share with you what we've started with the Prevention Collaborative, and I'm very, very excited because this is a journey that started this year in the month of August, and we're hoping that we can be able to do this within the next, maybe within the period of 18 months. And what we are looking here is one, that Prevention Collaborative will be able to work with CREAW as a support on our violence against women prevention program. And this is going to be a program where they are hand-holding, or we are learning from each other. So one of the things that we are looking here is to increase our knowledge on evidence-based violence against women prevention programming, and how we can apply this within the context of where CREAW is working. CREAW is working at the national level, but also working in different communities within the country. I think the other thing is that we're also doing a lot of reflection around the prevention approaches within the country, but also moving or building it further from what we have already learned under SASA for the last 4 years, and be able to build on that work for 4 years, and be able to see how can we be able to upscale this work, and what else is missing in this prevention approach within the country. Next slide. To date, I am very, very excited because this has been a learning journey for the organization. One of the things that we have done is to be able to do our context analysis. And as a result of our context analysis, that we have identified intimate partner violence as the leading form of violence against women in the country. We have also been able to look at some of the models that are working within the country, and also what is working within the region. As a result of this is that we have also been able to develop, we are developing a program that is looking at the couples program and community activism. Community activism is work that CREAW has already done using the SASA model, but also is that we have also been inspired by the work that was done in Rwanda under the program known as Eda Shakira. So we're going to be working on a couples program. And the other thing that we have done is that the organization did have a very, very detailed theory of change that is focusing only on prevention of violence against women. Again, a very positive thing for the organization is that now we are going to have a very, very detailed theory of change that is focusing only on prevention of violence against women. I think also the other thing that I'm happy is because the work that we have already learned from implementing the SASA model is that we are not going to say, oh, we implement SASA and now we are going to implement something else. No, it's going to be a build-up of the work that we have learned from SASA, and having implemented this within Nairobi, within one of the slums in the or informal setting in Nairobi, is that now the build up of this work is going to be done in a place that is not more urban. It's going to be in a rural setup. And again, we are looking what are kind of results that we're going to get from a different kind of setting. And we're really hoping that as a result of implementing this program, we can be able to share some of the results. Next slide, please. So our strategy, we have already started the design of the program. Very, very excited about this because we can actually be able to see where this is going. We are going to be able to do a pilot, and this is going to be done in 2 counties in the country. And then we will be followed by an evaluation. And as a result of the evaluation, we're also going to refine. Hoping then we can be able to upscale and finally be able to document. For us as an organization, we are very, very excited about this partnership. I keep saying this is the best thing that has happened to CREAW in 2019 because one, we have a partner able to engage with other models within or approaches within the region, within Africa and other parts of the world, is that we have also been able to develop our theory of change. We have been able to look at our context, but more importantly is that we'll also be able to pilot this program and be able to work with it for a period of 4 years. Previously our prevention work was focusing on a shorter period of time. Now it's very clear that you're going to implement for a period of 4 years. So I'm very, very excited about the journey in the partnership with Prevention Collaborative. Thank you, everyone. I think my slides have come to an end.
Thank you so much, Wangechi and Lyndsay, for those insightful presentations. Oh, and Devin too. It's been really exciting to hear all the work that's already been done around this area, just listening to the literature that's already been developed around this with the prevention briefs and blogs and all other work that's been done. But it's also very exciting for me to hear from Wangechi what the women rights organization and the eagerness that the organizations have in regard to using their practice data to inform their programming, but also to put it out there for other people to learn. So it's such a good space to for us to start this conversation. And now I would like us to look at some of the questions that have been sent from the audience. Our first question comes from Rita, and she asks, please explain a bit more about how to be a scribe if someone is interested, and what types of stories or features the collaborators will be interested in. Also, who should we reach out to? So she wants to know about how to become a scribe and how to get this information from the collaborative. Lyndsay, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I can do so. So thanks very much, Rita, for the question. So yes, so we wanted to have this webinar, and then we're planning on actually writing out through those who are signed up to our website in the next week or so, really reaching out for people to offer to be a scribe. So essentially, we're looking for people from different contexts, really largely people from the global south, because that's where the focus of our partnerships is. Who, from different countries, Africa, Asia, Middle East, Latin and Central America, who already perhaps do some writing, or have some skills at writing, and would be interested to offer their, and know something about the violence prevention field, and would be interested to support organizations locally in their own country or region to go in and spend some time with those organizations to document some of their practice. So we'll be sending out an email with a kind of a profile of what we're looking for and information on how to apply, and send in a kind of CV and a letter of motivation, or a background on yourself and a motivation. And then in terms of what sort of stories we would want to document, I think we're very open-minded at this stage. So I think we're going to be sort of piloting this going forward. And I think that is going to be a conversation with the organisations. What do they feel that they have from their programming, which is a good learning point, you know, from actually implementing on the field? Where have decisions of practitioners, information from practitioners, really kind of things that practitioners have done, really made a difference in the view of those practitioners to effective prevention programming? So kind of, or where there's been a failure, you know, where there's been a failure and there was a key learning from that, which then led that organisation to adapt the programme and change. So I guess the main focus is on learning points and sort of learning points from practice and from practitioner actions that then can be documented as stories, as videos, through photographs. So we will be writing out in the next week to 10 days. So if anyone on this call is not signed up on the sign up on the website, I'd encourage you to do so, so you will receive that email and you can put yourself forward if you wish.
Thank you, Lyndsay, for that response. The next question comes from Juliet, and she asks, I need more information on outcome harvesting and observation. I think here Juliet wants to know more about these types of evaluation. I welcome any of the speakers to respond to this.
Thank you.
Yeah, go on, Devin.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for the question, Juliet. Yeah. So outcome harvesting it's kind of an alternative to traditional evaluation approaches. So it's looking at an outcome that's being observed particularly in very complex situations where it may not be clear what the pathway of change is. And it involves working backward, involving those who are involved in a particular project or anyone who might be involved with those through whom change was observed, and kind of working backwards to identify which factors contributed to the change. That is all I can say about outcome harvesting, because to be frank, that's all I know. It was something that was looked into for one of our knowledge products, a practice brief on practice-based knowledge, but I do know of a website that has a lot of useful information on outcome harvesting. I don't know, Lena, if that's something that is easy enough to share in the chat box here and others will get it, or if there's a space to be able to send resources after the webinar is complete, but I'd be happy to share that.
Devin, please go ahead and try and share the link here, but also we will be able to share this particular presentation and probably some of the resources that are required after the webinar. I have a question from Priya, who asks, are there any early successes that have been seen where practice-based knowledge has fed back into improving programming? So that's her first part of the question. And she continues to ask, what are the specific types of support that the collaborative can provide for nonprofits working for VAC-VAL? So I think we'll break that question into two. It would be nice to hear from Wangechi in regard to some of the successes you've had in regard to how you've used your practice-based knowledge and fed it back into your programming. And then maybe we can hear from Lyndsay on the types of support that the collaborative can provide for nonprofits working on VAC-VAL to elevate their PBK. So Wangechi, you can go first, followed by Lyndsay.
Okay, thank you, Lena, for that. I think for us as an organization, one, we have been able, having implemented the SASA model for 4 years, is that there were a lot of stories coming from the communities, and those stories would not feature, for example, necessary feature in an evaluation. So what we have done is that as an organization is that now we are more ensuring that the stories that are coming from the communities are able to inform our work, our interventions, our implementation of work. And then the other thing that has happened is that even as we continue to develop our prevention work, is that it is being informed by the work that has already happened, the stories that are coming from the communities, the short videos that are coming from the community. And sometimes those short messages or short videos are actually coming from the activists who would not necessarily maybe feature in an evaluation. So what we are doing as an organization is building on the work that has already happened. The other thing is that previously as an organization, we didn't have a very, very detailed theory of change when it comes to our prevention work. With this partnership, now we have a clear theory of change of how our prevention work looks like. And embedded there is that we are not only going to be focusing on an evaluation, we are also going to be using other ways of collecting data, ensuring that each and every individuals who have been involved in this program are part of learning. We are organizing more reflection sessions with our team just to ensure that what is coming from the community continue to inform our intervention.
So it's Lyndsay. Hi, everyone. I'll just add an example to that, if I may, to the one that Wangechi gave. I was involved as part of the kind of research and support team for the Rwanda program that Wangechi mentioned, the Indashikirwa couples program that was a successful program to prevent violence. And the way in which practice-based knowledge was really important there was that we took an approach working with the program team to actually take time to really pilot the curriculum and learn from that. So working with the practitioners themselves went through training on the curriculum, which is something that we had learned from other programming and other practice. And then basically they did a whole pilot of the curriculum with a group of couples before the program was launched. And during that pilot, we had sort of random researchers there and an international researcher who worked together to observe the piloting and then basically collect feedback after each session from some of the participants and from the facilitators of the curriculum. And through that, we learned quite a lot about what was working in terms of pedagogy, which exercises worked, which didn't. We learned how important it was to have a male and a female facilitator there, because this was a couples curriculum where we needed to work maybe separately with a men's group and separately with a women's group. And also just, we finalized a decision because of that to accompany the curriculum also with the availability of a counselor, because there were such high levels of trauma from the genocide as well as violence, ongoing violence happening within families, that we realized how important it was to have the availability of a counsellor on hand during both the research and the program implementation. So all of that was really learned from interaction and gathering data from the practice, from trialing this curriculum. And because of that, I think the curriculum ended up being a lot more successful, both in terms of its content and the relevance of its content to the Rwandan context, as well as the pedagogy and the sort of the way the facilitation was set up. So that is a practical example that I think is one that I know of. In terms of the second question about supporting nonprofits, women's rights organizations, so again, the other thing we want to email out about in the next week to 10 days following this call is, again, through our mailing group, so again, please sign up, is an offer to organizations saying, do you have, are you interested in documenting practice? And we'll give some examples of the kinds of practice, but also leave that open. And basically, invite organizations to contact us and provide the contact details and say, well, yes, we are interested in having someone to come in and as a scribe and to work with us, or the other alternative is we would like to devote some internal time and we would actually like the Prevention Collaborative to support us to document knowledge. And then we have a number of options at how we do that, from the full learning partnerships, which is this 18-month process that Wangechi was describing, that CREAW Kenya is in partnership. And we've also got the option of a shorter kind of interaction, which could just be around supporting the organisation to document some of this practice, and then to elevate that through our knowledge platform, through briefs, and obviously through social media and the organisation's own networks as well. So again, we'll send an email out in the next 7 to 10 days inviting organisations who are interested to write to us and talk about what they would like documented and what their ideas are.
Thank you, Lyndsay. Thank you, Wangechi, for those responses. Again, we can see a lot of questions coming out on support to organizations on elevating their practice-based knowledge. There's a lot of interest around this area, and encourage us to keep this conversation going and keep sharing our experiences around this. Just as a reminder, you're welcome to the Prevention Collaborative Knowledge Hub for any more information, to look at our briefs and our reviews and all the literatures that we've published around this area. Okay, so before wrapping up, I'd like to give a big appreciation to all our presenters for sharing their work with us today, and to all of you for joining this conversation today. We look forward to continue engaging on these issues, supporting the issue around practice-based knowledge, and also just reminding you that if you'd like to share what you've heard and to share the information that we have shared today on this webinar, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar very soon on our platform, and it will be posted. The link will be sent to you on this platform. We'll just give Lyndsay 1 minute to present our knowledge platform before we close down the webinar.
Yeah,
Welcome,
thank you,
Lyndsay.
Lena. I thought it'd just be useful before people go, just to briefly show you a few of the practice resources that we've started to put on our platform. And this is the start of work, it's work in progress, but I thought I would just show you. So this is the front page of our knowledge platform, which you get to by clicking knowledge on our homepage. There are a variety of resources here, but under the label of practice resources, I'll just show you a few of the things that we have. So I was mentioning practice briefs. So under here, we feature a range of briefs that are produced by us where we feel there is a gap, but also that other organizations and partner organizations have produced around practice. So this is a page here, and you can see that there are a variety of briefs. I'm just going to pick on one down here, for example. I was talking about facilitation earlier. So, for example, if you just click on this, you get an overview of what the brief's about, and then you can download it. And this just shows you the kind of things that we've been doing. So usually these briefs are around 6 pages, and they just try to give an overview. That's some of the issues this brief looks at, for example, around how do we think about training and mentoring facilitators to lead critical reflection groups in community, with couples, with individuals, with men, with women. So it kind of collects some case studies, some examples, some tips, some techniques. So it's very much focused on that practical side of how we actually would do this, and what's important to think about when we're recruiting. If you look here, when we're training facilitators. So these briefs are put together often by external writers, people we approach, or people who approach us with ideas, and they often interview in organizations, and they collect tips, and they put these together into kind of these thematic briefs. So that's just one example, very briefly. And then also under the area of practice, if I just go back here, we also have training curricula, Scratch. We have, there's also a set of tools and guidance in here, where there's kind of manuals, there's sort of guidance on research, norms on how to kind of diagnose social norms. So again, quite a lot of sort of practice-based tools that can help. Maybe the final thing I will just show you here is these program summaries. So these are documents that actually the collaborative has produced, which really try to get at some of the nuts and bolts of what programs consist of. So if I look at the Banda Barejo one here for an example, it tries to tell you what the program is about, the kind of the background to the program, why, who produced the program, why it was started. where the program is operating. It talks a bit about adaptation, and then it really goes into some of the nuts and bolts of that program. What does it consist of? What are the interventions? What do they think about in terms of practice, adaptation, again, selecting facilitators? It gives you an overview of the curriculum. So it really is intended to help other practitioners to think through what the components of their program might be. And then finally, it's actually in our community section up here. This is where we have our webinars stored and news, but also this is where we've started to collect together some of these prevention stories. So this is a first attempt at collecting practitioner stories. So all the people that are featured here are practitioners or people that work in support of practitioners who have kind of told stories about lessons they've had from the practice of programming. And so they're kind of, they're written as stories. I can look at this one here, which is a story in Sri Lanka by Kamini Janandasa about an organization that she's set up working with particularly young boys who've been neglected and suffered abuse, to sort of work on the healing of these young boys and gender attitudes and behaviours in order to support them not to become violent when they are adults. And she talks about some of the practice and some of the learning of that programme. So that's just a brief introduction to some of the things we've started to do. There's a lot more to do, and we really are hoping now through this initiative to expand the resources we have on practice and to elevate more voices and a diversity of voices on this platform. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you, Lyndsay, for taking us through that. As you can see, we have exciting information in our knowledge platform. We invite you to sign up and into the platform and access this information, but also share this with your friends, your colleagues, everyone who may need to have access to this information. Thank you for the interesting conversation. Thank you for the technical team behind that has made this happen. Despite the few hiccups, we still managed to have a good webinar, and I'd like to end the session. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.